Well, today we're going to talk about rational ignorance. This is lecture number 7, and it's fundamental insight of economics is what do? You do things as long as the added benefit is bigger than the added cost, right? I mean, you go where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. But, you know, for those of you that, you know, have been thinking back to Econ 202 or 105 or whatever, right? You do things as long as the added benefit is bigger than the added cost. So what happens if we put that and start, you know, use that, that concept and we start looking at voting behavior? What would you do? You'd vote as long as the added benefit to voting is bigger than the added cost of voting, right? So let's think about a couple of things then. What's the benefit to you of voting? Well, it might be that candidate A is the one you really want and candidate B is very different and you're going to really want candidate A to win, okay? Now, but if you sort of think through this, what is the difference likely to be between the candidates? Because we already talked about Downs's median voter model, right? And what's going to happen is the parties are going to, you know, the candidates are going to move towards the median of the distribution. So if we sort of think about that, then we can say, okay, what is the added benefit What's the added benefit of voting? Well, first thing to think about is, as I just mentioned, what about the difference in the candidates? Right? But we already have our median voter and median voter theorem, right? That where we said, you know, what's going to happen? The candidates are going to move to the median. And you'll recall that I held up the little Tweedledum and Tweedledee, or excuse me, Tweedledee and Tweedle-R, which was Tweedle Democrat, Tweedle Republican, and it said vote Libertarian, so okay. But the point is that, you know, I'm making a decision about should I go and vote, should I take the time to stand in line, and should I take the time to figure out what's going on with the candidates. If you've had, you know, Downs's median voter, you'll know that, hey, the candidate's going to be pretty close together, particularly if you're looking at a congressional race, right? We talked about Smithies, right? That is, if you know, remember, think back to the first midterm, talked about Smithies that said that, you know, if you have a multimodal distribution and you have alienation, then what could happen is you could move towards separate, you know, candidates would look very different. But, you know, in general, in any congressional race, what's going to happen? The candidates are going to move, particularly in a primary, are going to move together. Now, let's think about, okay, so in some districts you might be very Republican and, you know, the candidates, or the Republican candidates over here and the Democratic candidates over there, because we talked about the Democratic candidate, if you recall, we talked about the Democratic candidate is going to have to move to the median of the Democrats and the Republican candidate is going to move to the median of the Republicans, and then they'll try to move towards the center of the overall distribution. But, and we'll talk about this, you know, later on, is that the districts tend to be highly Republican or highly Democrat. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but well more than 300 of the 435 districts either are solid Democrat or solid Republican. So who you end up voting for in the end is, you know, is not going to be very different. Now, let's think about what else, the other thing, the candidates might be different. They're close together. It doesn't matter too much who you vote for. The second thing is to think about what's the probability that you can affect the outcome. or let's put it this way, I like to say it a little bit differently, that you can determine the outcome with your vote. Well, if there are only 3 people voting, then you have a pretty good chance of determining what, your particular vote determines who wins. Because the other 2 people, one votes for the Republican and the other votes for the Democrat, then your vote will determine, who wins. It'll be 2-1. But let's think about, what if you're talking about the presidential election? For a presidential election, for your vote to determine, think about what's got to happen in who's the president. Well, first of all, your state is going to have to determine who wins in the Electoral College. So let's say you're Michigan, when Michigan's votes are included in the Electoral College, their votes determine who wins, right? So you don't need a tie in the Electoral College, but there's enough votes in Michigan so that your vote determines the outcome. So in our example here, Michigan electors determine the outcome. Then what has to happen is that Michigan's got to be a tie among the millions of voters out there. There's got to be a tie, and then your vote determines who wins, right? So there's got to be a tie among voters in Michigan. Without you, your vote wins. Well, what's the probability of that? Probably that is really low. In fact, I think there was a movie, maybe some of you, like if you were here, someone could pop up and say, oh yeah, that's the name of the movie. But it seems like there was a movie about where one person's vote determined who became president or something like that. It was some sort of comedy. All right, so what's the cost to voting, right? I mean, if you sort of think through, you got to think about, there are costs of voting, right? You got to get to the voting place, right? You got to spend time, right? There's a time cost to the vote. Absentee balloting would reduce that time cost, right? But you still got to go through the ballot, and you still got to get your absentee ballot. You got to apply for that. You have to turn the absentee ballot in somehow. So there's some time cost involved in that. So there's a time to cast there's a time cost. What am I saying? There's a time cost to the vote, and there's a time cost to learning about the issues and candidates. So do you really want to undertake all that time to do that when the probability of your affecting the outcome is really low, and if the candidates aren't very far apart, you'd think that people wouldn't vote very often. You'd also expect to see that voter turnout in local elections, where the probability of you affecting the outcome is higher, would be greater than turnout in the presidential elections. Professor Sweeney years ago told me about there was a ballot in Jonesville. It might have been for the schools of the city or whatever it was, there was a yes or no vote to have a millage, and it turned out that the millage won by 1 vote. And he did not actually end up going to vote that day. And so he was complaining that, maybe the thing wouldn't have passed if he'd gone in. I don't think he wanted it to pass. I forget what the details were. But the bottom line was that there was a particular vote where in fact the one vote did determine the outcome. But that's, that's highly unusual. You'd think that a city council race then would have greater voter turnout than the general election for the president. But that doesn't turn out to be the case. In fact, my wife was a city councilwoman for a bit in Hillsdale, and she won in a special election, and she stomped her opponent because she got 25 votes, and the opponent got 12. So voter turnout is lower in races where the outcome, where you can affect the outcome, is greater. So that seems a little odd. So you might think, well, why in the world do people vote? That's a good question. One is that you might feel part of the community, right? That is, let's just think about it that way, is that, okay, you got your friends, and suppose that the economy is now open again, and you can go to, Hillsdale Brewing Company for a beer or something, or for a macaroni and cheese, and you're sitting around talking with your friends, and they ask, well, hey, who'd you vote for, right? You don't want to feel like, oh my gosh, I didn't vote, right? Everybody's, talking about, the rest of the people are talking about who they voted for, or who they were following. Did you vote for Biden, or did you vote for Bernie Sanders, or whatever? So just feeling part of the community, right? You probably do lots of things to just feel part of the community. Second reason, and again, I'm just, making my own thoughts about it, and other people have also talked about it, obviously. But it's not that people know exactly why people vote, but these are things that you might think through. The second thing is you might have some idea of civic duty. There are actually some places, I believe Australia, where you have to vote, like you're legally required to vote. But, what do you learn in high school, right? You learn in high school that you have a duty to vote. As a member of the United States, it is your civic duty to go out and to vote. And if you're shirking your duty if you don't vote. Maybe you just want someone to root for. Lots of election coverage, right? Especially the night of the election. Maybe you go to, you go to some place to your friends and you're watching the election results on television, or, whatever. You just want somebody to vote for. So like when you go to the Hillsdale County Fair, the most popular fair on earth, they'll have horse races sometimes. And if you're there for the horse races, it's not much fun to watch the horse race unless you have voted on it, or put a $2 bet on some horse, right? You might just go ahead and put a $2 bet down just to make it more fun to watch the race itself. So it may be that one of the reasons that people vote, or maybe that you might vote, is because you want to have somebody to root for during the when you're watching the television results. Another thing is you may just want to say that you voted for someone in particular, even if you didn't think that they were the best candidate. So, for example, maybe you vote for Hillary Clinton. Maybe you vote for Hillary Clinton because you want to say you voted for the first woman president. And you may not think that Hillary's going to be very good, or you might think that Hillary might even do poorly if she were president. But you may go ahead and, because you know your particular vote is not going to determine the outcome, probability is very low, then you might just vote for Hillary just so you can say that you voted for her. A fifth thing to think about is that you may just want to, did I already talk about? Yeah. I guess I only want 4. I only have, oh no, here's the 5th one. Here's what I think. That's what I was thinking about. What I think is that people vote just because of their sort of entertainment purposes. That is, you think it's just sort of fun to do. People like going to the football games, and maybe you just like, going to the, going out and voting and hanging out with your friends, and waiting in line is sort of fun for you, right? So you could make up lots of different reasons why people might be voting. They're probably not voting because they think that the expected value, right, which is what we were talking about, is the expected value of voting, which is the probability that you determine the outcome times the value of the outcome. Right? We noted that both of these components of the expected value are small, right? The probability of determining the outcome is very small, and if the candidates are pretty close together, the value of the outcome is going to be pretty small. So it's probably not true that people are voting because they have a high expected value, or the expected value of their vote is greater than the cost of that. So again, you might think of other reasons on your own about why people vote, but it's probably not that they're going to that they think the expected value is greater than the cost of voting. A nice book on this is by Brian Kaplan, and it's called The Myth of the Rational Voter. And it's a nice little book. Again, if you are thinking about what you want to do your paper on, it might be something that you might just, I don't look how much it costs, but you probably can get a Kindle version of it really inexpensively, or I'm presuming that you can. But anyway, it might be a book that you might just want to have in paperback, because it is an interesting little book. So, so what's going to be true of the voter who actually shows up and votes, right? I mean, clearly millions of people are voting in the presidential election in 2020, okay? There'll be millions of people that show up, and what will we know about them, okay? Well, they're rational. I mean, it's possible. I mean, Brian Kaplan's starting to, talking about the myth of the rational voter as if people aren't rational. But it may be that you're rational, but what happens is you are rationally ignorant. And so what does that mean? It means that you're going to know very little about the candidate or the issue. You're going to know little about the candidate or the issue. Well, why is that? it's not because you are ignorant, because you just are stupid. You won't be able to figure it out, right? Or you're lazy. You're rationally ignorant because what's going on? What's the added benefit of knowing this versus the added cost? Right? The added benefit of this knowledge versus the added cost. Well, let's think about how knowledgeable you guys are, right? Because you are probably more than, I mean, you're taking a public choice class, you're at Hillsdale College, you probably know more about issues and candidates than the average person does. Question is, and since you're not able to raise your hand, I can't really see what's going on, but think about how many of you can name your congressman, right? There might be a number of you that can name your congressman, but probably not a lot can name your state representative or name your state senator. And if you can name your congressman, how many would know what committees they sit on? I know Tim Walberg personally, he's our congressman, and I don't have a clue as to what committees Tim sits on. I was just talking to him several times this week, at least over email, about what's going on in the coronavirus shutdown of the economy and what the legislature, the Congress ought to be doing on this. So feeding back and forth on that particular issue, but hey, I don't know what committees Tim sits on, even though he even sends out information every now and then. What's called a franking privilege that legislators have is that they can send out information and they don't have to pay out of their own personal pocket. They can pay it out of their budget to inform their constituency. Here's what issues are out there and here's how I'm voting on it, etc. In fact, there was a University of Pennsylvania survey, just you have to You don't have to memorize this by any means. But it was in 2014, and what it did was it looked at people that were 18 to 35. And it turned out that only 36% could even name 3 branches of government. Right? Only 36% could name 3 branches of government. Just to give you an idea of how knowledgeable they are. In fact, 35% couldn't even name 1 of the 3 branches of government. So they're probably not very knowledgeable about who's on the U.S. Supreme Court and how do they get there and that sort of thing. In fact, 77% of the people that were surveyed couldn't name even 1 of their United States senators. So they're probably fairly rationally ignorant, okay? But again, it's not that they should have known this and somehow they are just failing to do it. It is that why are you rationally ignorant about what is in the Affordable Care Act or what was in the Affordable Care Act? In fact, that was an interesting thing. Remember, this was with this is sometimes called Obamacare, right? The Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was over 2,000 pages long. In fact, it was 2,300 pages long. I actually put it in the old days when we had the server, before we had a box, loaded things on what's called the server. But anyway, I placed it there in the equivalent of the box folder so my students could read it, right? Not one read the 2,300 pages of the Affordable Care Act. Why not? Because the added benefit to them was certainly less than the added cost to them of doing that. Nancy Pelosi, current Speaker of the House and Speaker of the House at the time, what did she say? She said that we have to pass it in order to find out what's in it, right? That was what the Speaker of the House was saying. We have to pass this thing before we can find out what's in it. I can guarantee you, again, I was a congressional chief of staff. I recall one bill that was on on the House floor that in those days you didn't have the internet and things like that. So you actually had to physically read the bill. It was over 1,000 pages, and we had to vote on it within 24 hours. What's going on today? You'll notice that there's the Coronavirus Relief Act that's going on. It's going to be 1,000 pages anyway, and it's being passed within certainly by the House is going to get it, and they'll have 24 hours maybe to look at it. The Senate, probably when the bill was actually drafted and probably had hours to take a look at it. So now, of course, what's going on is that some of the staff will have read part of the bill, and some of the staff will have read this part of the bill, and they'll inform the senators, and the same thing will go on in the House, so that there's some knowledge about it. But realistically, your government, when it has major pieces of legislation, probably even the people who are voting on it aren't familiar with everything that's going on within the bill. Now, it may be that some of you may know who your state rep is and may know all those things that I asked about, what committees they sit on, and et cetera. But generally, those are people who are super interested in the topic. They get enjoyment out of knowing about it, right? I mean, that was sort of one of the things we might have included there when we were talking about why people vote. They just really enjoy knowing about such things. Some people know who the lineup is for the Chicago Cubs, even though that knowledge isn't going to make it so that the Cubs end up winning the World Series. It is people just enjoy knowing about that. And so, in fact, back in the day, I used to know the lineup of the New York Yankees back when I was, 10, 11, 12 years old. They followed the Yankees baseball back in those days. And so, but it wasn't like I was going to affect the outcome of the baseball game by knowing, who was playing second base for the New York Yankees, which was Bobby Richardson. And actually, I think about it, Gil McDougall was the third baseman, and Tony Kubek was the second baseman. Bill Skowron was the first baseman. Yogi Berra was the catcher. Okay? So just remember all those things. But so it sort of sticks in your brain. But it's just fun to know that. And again, that's what I'm talking about. People might want to vote because it's fun, or people might want to know about these things because it's fun. And so, what's the result of? One result of this rational ignorance. And again, it is rational to be ignorant, right? Because the marginal benefit of learning about this stuff is bigger than the marginal cost. Well, first of all, if we look at what's the result, and I'm going to switch, trying to remember, Professor Butter's telling me to keep switching these things so they don't dry out. One of the results is that special interest groups will dominate the process. That's one result. Think about that. Probably none of you out there know whether there's a tariff on shoes or not, right? But if you were the lobbyist for Nike or you were the lobbyist for New Balance, you would certainly know whether there is a tariff on shoes, right? because the special interest groups, the marginal benefit to them of knowing about the issue is certainly bigger than the marginal cost. I will guarantee you that the lobbyist for the National Chiropractic Association or whatever knew whether chiropractic was being covered in the Affordable Care Act. I can guarantee you that, we talked about Archer Daniels Midland. Archer Daniels Midland, supermarkets of the world, right? They grow a lot of corn. What's going to happen? They're gonna rent seek, right? Their lobbyist is going to try to affect what's going on with sugar quotas, right? And for us, we don't even know whether sugar quotas are there. Part of it is because we're not likely to affect the outcome, right? Because we don't even know who the person that is the legislative director for the United States Senator. We don't even know who they are. In fact, when I was Nick Smith's chief of staff, I didn't get phone calls from the average constituent there in Hillsdale or Jackson, the areas that Nick covered, because they didn't even know who I was, right? They didn't know I was the chief of staff. Probably most of them didn't even know who the congressman was. But the lobbyists certainly did. The lobbyists would come in and want to talk to me about different bills that were coming up. And why did they want to talk to me? Because they knew I could influence what Nick was going to do, or at least I'd attempt to influence what Nick was going to do on a particular vote. And so the lobbyists sort of know how the system works, right? Many times you're probably better off talking to the legislative staff that the United States Senator or state senator or state representative is relying on for advice than talking to the legislator directly, because they may go around and just turn around and say, okay, and ask their staff what the staff thinks about this to get their advice on it. So the marginal benefit of knowing about these things is much greater for the special interest groups than it is for you, and so they will tend to dominate the political process. There's this idea that somehow if what we did is we'd limit what the lobbyists can spend, or how much you can spend on lobbying, or all sorts of things like that, right? That's simply not going to result in a reduction in the influence of special interest groups. The fact that the average person is racially ignorant means that there's going to be a movement towards the special interest groups. They're going to be the ones that are going to have a marginal benefit, knowing that's larger than the marginal cost. Second thing is that the special interest groups, what do they do? They reduce the cost of information to you. They reduce the cost of information to the voter. Remember that earlier we had talked about, you could put together a coalition of people who have minority viewpoints on the different issues, and you could put a coalition of minority viewpoints if they really cared about that one particular issue, and defeat somebody that took the majority position on the different issues, right? Well, what if the issue you really cared about was gun control, right? And you want it, and you have people running for state rep and state senate and Congress and president, etc. And so you want to know what each candidate's position is on gun control. One easy way to do that is to send $5 off to the National Rifle Association. And then the National Rifle Association will say, here's the candidates that we endorse. which is telling you they have a position on gun control that if you were someone that wanted to reduce the amount of gun control or limit the amount of gun control, you would know, okay, these are the candidates I should be voting for. Or let's say you wanted to know about abortion and what the different candidates' stance were on abortion. You could send money off to Planned Parenthood, or you could send money off to the Right to Life, and they will then send you, here's the candidates that they are for, or they might even send you information about a particular bill that's in front of the legislature, so that you can, the information cost is now lower because these special interest groups are now giving you information and you don't have to go look it up yourself. It'll also affect the type of campaign ads. That is, what am I going to do on a campaign? I might, if I have an ad that tries to explain to you what the the position that I have on a particular issue is, I've got to like shrink that down into 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, I got to tell you everything about this particular issue, right? So what's going to happen is these campaign ads are not going to be I'm not going to have detailed issues and issue briefs because rationally ignorant people just aren't even going to read them. So I'm going to try to what? I'm just going to appeal to emotion, right? I'm going to frame the issue as an emotional issue. The corporate income tax cut, right? Oh, that's just that's like trickle down. That's just going to give all sorts of money to all these rich people. Okay. I could try to explain to you that if you took my public finance class, we could talk about what the economic incidence of the corporate income tax is, and we could go on and talk about that for a while. But people aren't going to pay attention to that. So I'm going to frame the issue in some very emotional way of looking at it. Excuse me. Also that you get negative ads. If you've ever run for election or helped someone run for election, what do you know? You know that negative ads tend to be, fairly effective, especially when you get down to two candidates. A negative ad isn't going to be super effective if you're have a negative ad against, let's say there's 6 people running, and you spend your money with a negative ad on the candidate A. You don't know that the people that would have voted for candidate A would have ended up voting for you, right? But once you get down to 2 or 3 candidates, then you'll start to see negative ads. And so the negative ads, why do they work? Because people don't know very much about the candidate, and it forces the other candidate, right? It forces the opponent to respond. If what you do is the other opponent, it forces your opponent to respond. I'm starting to get a little bit sloppy in my writing. I was doing better at the beginning. I'm getting back to my habit of writing sloppily. But anyway, oftentimes you'll see, they didn't respond to that negative ad. And when they didn't, what happens is if you don't respond, people believe that the thing's true because they won't know whether it's true or not. And so that's why we get information or negative ads and information. So what does that lead us to know? That is, we said before, reasons for government to intervene, right? Negative externalities, public goods. So we said that, okay, we're going to have government intervene. So notice that one of the things we talked about with negative externalities would be you would impose a Pigouvian tax, right? And then we started thinking through, well, gee, how am I going to know what the marginal external cost is of this externality? And what in the political process is going to get me to where the tax itself is actually, the Pigouvian tax is actually going to be equal to the marginal external cost. And so when we think about the fact that you've got rationally ignorant voters, the idea is that if you say, okay, I want government to intervene. And we started out that's one of the reasons we started out the class talking about public goods and negative externalities and the like. And so there's a reason that government might want to intervene, right? But we also need to think through, okay, just as we looked at the idea that if you had well-defined property rights, then and you had zero transactions costs, right? All the government's got to do is assign the property rights, and then when in the case of an externality, and then it'll get that property right will get traded around, right? Talked about that. But if we say, okay, we got a reason for government to intervene, one of the things we need to think about is we're not going to have a benevolent dictator who knows what's going on. Right? Who is knowledgeable. So when we argue for, or if you decide that you want to have government intervention, and if you listen to people that are, running for office, or you listen to people that are discussing a particular issue, they may be saying, they may be pointing out that there is a problem with how things are going in the market process. And you might say, okay, let's let government do it. But you're not going to let government do it, right? And for those who remember that have had Econ 105, you might recall that Mises talks about that all state action is human action, right? That there is no such thing as the Department of Environmental Quality that's going to come in and examine, whether you're, you can put, some sort of flood wall or something out there on your croplands or whatever. What we really want to think about when we let government do it, what's going to happen? We're going to have officials that are elected by rationally ignorant voters. Right? If we framed it that way, we said, okay, here's the way it's going to work. We're going to let the government intervene, and who's going to make up the people that are actually making those decisions? We're going to elect people, and they're going to have rationally ignorant folks going in, voting, at the ballot. They're going to be the ones that are voting, and we're going to elect these people, and everybody that voted, most people, it's a large number of people that are voting for them are ignorant of who the candidate really is and what the issues are, et cetera. Notice that what was going on with the 17th Amendment. What happened there is, how did you elect a U.S. Senator? The U.S. Senator was elected by the state legislator. And the state legislature probably wasn't rationally ignorant, right? They will know what the U.S. senator is doing, right? They there's not, 5 million people voting in the state of Michigan for the United States Senator. Who's voting for the United States Senator are the state legislators, and they probably know a lot about what's going on with that senator. Why is that? Because if you think back to the 10th Amendment, the idea is that the states are supposed to have the powers. The only thing that the federal government has power to do is to do those things which are specifically enumerated in the Constitution. And if you were a United States Senator that started moving all sorts of power over to the federal government, the state legislators would say, well, wait a minute, no, we're supposed to be the ones with the power. You're going to not get reelected by us, the state legislator, if what you're doing is you're moving all sorts of power away from the states to the federal government. Again, I make that point in Econ 105 near the end of that when we're talking about why you got one of the reasons you got a growth in the federal government from 1913 on. One of the reasons was the 17th Amendment. But our point here is that the idea was that you would be electing senators not by people who are rationally ignorant, which is how it works now, but you'd be electing senators by people who knew what the senator was doing and what the different issues were. Again, if you have read de Tocqueville, he talks about tyranny and majority, and it may be democracy is tyranny of the majority, but it's tyranny of the ignorant majority, if you sort of think through that. One last point, or a couple last 2 points that I want to make. One is that because you're elected by rationally ignorant voters, and you have the candidates moving towards the median, that incumbents have a very high re-election rate. Re-election rate. And if you go to opensecrets.gov, you can find this information, but just and I will put in the folder the last 10 elections, what the re-election was for the House and the Senate. But if you look at the percentage that get re-elected, if we look at the House and we look at the elections from 2000 through 2018, the lowest that you had is 85%. The lowest re-election rate was 85%. And that was in fact, that was in 2010. And that's the only time that it was less than 90%. In fact, it's 95% or more in 5 of the 10 races, 5 of the 10 elections that are listed there. The Senate is not as high a re-election rate. It's high, but it's not as high, and you can sort of see why. Because, as we said, people will tend to congregate in like socioeconomic statuses, and they tend to congregate then with when we were talking about gerrymandering and why the districts sort of, we tend to have districts that are not competitive, and in terms of party. So in the congressional districts, you could have Detroit, and then you could have Hillsdale County, etc. But for the state as a whole, it's less likely that you'll get a very high concentration of Democrats in one section and a high concentration of Republicans in the other section. That can work out and have Republicans and Democrats in the Congress being reelected over and over again. But in the Senate, it's broader, and so the marginal difference between the number of Republicans and senators is going to be smaller statewide than it is within any particular House district. But still, if we look at the Senate, in the Senate, it ranges from 79% to 96% in terms of re-election in terms of those 10 years, and 84% re-election rate is in or greater is in 6 out of 10. 6 out of the 10 races, the re-election rate was 84% or greater. All right. The last thing I wanted to just talk about here is that suppose that people don't show up, right? Suppose that voter turnout is really low. Can we tell what the difference would be if we had everybody vote versus this sample of people that voted? Let's say if everybody voted, we would get a outcome, and if we take a subsample, what's the probability that the number of votes for Republican, for example, what's the percentage of votes for the Republican? What would that be if we only took a smaller sample? And there's just an interesting last little point is that if the distribution of preferences is normal, right? So let's say we have left, center, and right, and it looks like that, right? We looked at that when we were looking at median voter model and hoteling, and we looked at Smithies. When we were looking at there, we were looking at distributions. But if the distribution of preferences is normal, then you can select a confidence interval. And you can pick a sample size, so you are whatever percentage that you want, or whatever percentage or probability that you are within that percentage. So basically what I'm going to say is, okay, I can be given a sample. I'm going to know that the outcome within that sample is relatively close to, or whatever distance that I want from what would be the true population outcome. And there's a formula that I'm not going to expect you to remember. Just the point that I'm trying to make is that if the distribution of preferences is normal, then you don't need a huge sample size in order to have the outcome be really close to what you might have expected. So let me just give you the formula here. It's the number, n is the sample size that you need. If p times 1 minus p, where p is the true percentage winner. It's the true percentage that the winner gets. Okay, so we want to know what is the true percentage that the winner gets. E is our acceptable error. That is, okay, I want to be, for example, 5%. That is, I want to be 95% confident that the percentage that the winner gets out of our sample size is within a certain distance from what the true percentage is. And Z is the number of standard deviations away. Right? So we have a normal distribution, and the question is, how big does n have to be? And the formula for this is, oh, I shouldn't have done it that way. Let's do it this way. N is equal to p times 1 minus p divided by E, which is the expected error that we want. Z is the number of standard deviations you want to weigh, squared. Okay? Well, it turns out that this thing is minimized when, or excuse me, this thing is maximized when p is equal to 0.5, right? And is it a maximum when p equals 0.5? That is, if it's really close, right? If the probability, if the percentage that the winner gets is 50%, okay, then the that's when the sample size has got to be as large as possible. So if you plug in 0.5, or 50% or half, if you plug that in, then you can solve for n given what the number, how close you want it to be from, and or what's the chance that you're going to be correct. You want to be like 3% certain that you're within so many standard deviations from the true outcome, what the true probability is. It turns out that if you have n equals 40,000, then you are going to be 95% certain. And again, I'm not asking you to memorize any of this stuff. I just want to give you the point that you don't need massive sizes. That you're going to be 95% certain that you're within 0.5% of the true p. Okay? That is, if we had let everybody vote and the winning candidate would have got 60%, then you are, if you take 40,000 people vote, they'll actually show up, you're going to be 95% certain that you're going to be between 60.5 and 59.5 is the, that, so that you're going to be really pretty close. You know what the true value is. So if this thing turned out that, as I was saying, if out of this n equals 40,000, okay, the winner gets 60%, then the true winning percentage would be 59.5 to 60.5. So you can get pretty close. You can say, okay, yeah, it turns out that, the Republican candidate got, 60% of the ballot, or the 60% of the vote when you had 40,000 people voting out of out of 10 million or whatever. You know that you're going to be pretty close to what the actual outcome would have been if we let everybody vote. And then just, if you had 18 million. Let's say you're looking at a national popular vote, and so you had everybody in the United States voting. If you have 18 million, you can be 99% certain that the winner was in plus or minus 0.03%. So rather than having 200 million, or let's say 150 million people voting, I only need 18 million people to vote, and I'm 99% certain that the outcome from those people voting is within 0.03% of what it would be if I let everybody vote. So that, just the point here is that the sample size, you don't need a huge sample size to be pretty close to what would have happened if everybody voted. So it's, also, they always talk about voter turnout. Now, if what turns out is that your people are the ones that don't turn out to vote, right? This is assuming that we have a normal distribution of preferences and people don't have a difference in how they turn out. If voter turnout's important, we've talked about that before when we were talking about the Smithies, alienation, et cetera. When we were talking about, Bernie Sanders was saying that his people would turn out, et cetera. Not considering, voter turnout being different for one candidate rather than the other. If that's the case, the point is that I can get a reasonably close estimate of what the true value, the true vote would be from a relatively small sample size. All right. So again, I'm not expecting you to be able to reproduce this equation or whatever. I just wanted you to get the idea. That will conclude what our discussion of rational ignorance is, and this will be one of the things that we'll cover on the final.